So I've started the recording of the panel. Just give me a second. I think it's starting. Yeah. Sure. So we've started the recording, and before we begin the panel, I again repeat, all the other audience who have come to view the panel, welcome for the panel discussion. But we would request you to mute yourselves so that our panel can also have discussion. So yeah, so that we can engage in a fruitful discussion. I hope everyone have muted themselves. So shall we begin with today's panel?
I think we are good to go.
Taarini, would you like to start with the first question?
Okay, sure. Why not? In India, trans and queer women are one of the groups who are at the edge. It has been a struggle to survive within women's groups and subsequently raise our issues. In your experience, do you see women groups sharing that space with us? And has there been any kind of change over the last few years?
Yeah, hello everyone. Am I audible now?
Yes, you are.
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yep. In my point of view, there is a lot of changes, but at the same time, in a few more areas, like in the villages and the small towns, there is no awareness about the LGBTIQA plus. Even many harassments are happening, and recently in Goa, I think I hope everyone know about it. Like one lesbian person harassed another lesbian person. So even I'm totally confused that when all the gender minority people feel safe, but in most of the places, it's a keep on changing. They've started supporting others. Yeah, that's about from my side. Thank you.
Pooja, would you like to add in?
Sure. Just to clarify, we were talking about marginalizations of queer and trans women within other mainstream sort of women's spaces, movements, and all. No.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So I think it's important to again look at some of the history of this kind of engagement with gender and sexuality. We can go back to the time that within the sort of women's movements, the sexuality question was taken up more as an aspect of marginalization. Gender was more as an aspect of marginalization and not as an issue of privilege, but was really seen as an axis of marginalization that causes oppression. So in terms of engaging with sexuality, there is a history of how there were lesbians, cis lesbians within the movement, and also along with trans women have been speaking of sexuality and gender as axes of oppression and not just matters of self-declaration or self-identification. And I think that's something that's been pushed for some time now, and we have only grown in the way that we are able to talk about it. We've only grown in the way that we have access to words, terminology, resources, and also I think definitely these were issues that were not taken up. There was a certain hierarchization of issue that first we will tackle this and the rest will follow. This issue is more important than that issue. And somehow gender sexuality did become one of those that got sort of relegated to the lower sort of rungs of this hierarchy, and that has, I think, over time been changing. It's still something we have to push for, because the normative still has a hold on all our lives. The world is still described and arranged in normative ways. So women who do not conform, queer and trans women who live and experience non-normativity, have had to continuously sort of talk about it. But I think now we are better placed in terms of, just being able to have that conversation and open those spaces up. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Maya and Pooja, for shedding light on how the current scenario is and how um, the marginalization operates uh, within the movement in general, and also highlighting the need for understanding how the marginalization occurred in the historical times till to the present times. So, uh, Suya, would you like to add in to the discussion?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, so I think it's a very interesting question. For me personally, like, I think, my caste and class privilege has sort of like protected me in these situations where I have sort of been able to choose, queer spaces to go into. So I don't even engage. Like, for me, mainstream women's spaces, it's not really even something that I personally am very interested in being a part of, because I, very much identify as queer, and that is my safe space, and I focus more on how queer movements are including women, rather than the other way around. And not just women, obviously, like also non-binary people. Like myself, I'm non-binary. I don't identify as a cisgender woman. So I'm more interested in sort of, finding spaces which already are intersectional and making that a safe space, rather than sort of, going to mainstream women's spaces and sort of trying to fit in there. I think whenever we, at least for me, like whenever I enter a heteronormative space, it doesn't even have to. It's just like, from, like how my outfit is looked at, or like, things like that. I think, like, just straight off from the beginning, in very subtle and sometimes overt ways, it's communicated that, you perhaps don't sort of fit what is expected. Like sometimes people, like, they may try to be very like politically correct, because now they're aware, right? Like, people know that, not accepting queerness is a bad thing, it's seen as like politically backwards and stuff. So, they are kind of overtly conscious, but in more subtle ways. Like, they're not very like they don't understand, or they don't know about the nuances. And I don't think a lot of work is being done in that way. You know, so I mean, I don't know. Like, it's just yeah, I'm just more interested in kind of finding spaces where people are sort of intersectional and working to improve that, rather than trying to go somewhere and trying to fit in, or trying to be like, accept me or whatever. I'm, like, I feel like that's too much energy for me personally. So yeah, thank you.
Go ahead.
Thanks
Thank you
for that
so much.
illuminating answer so much. Yeah, I think we have actually observed that within the queer movements that we generally try to not talk outside the community, but then we have so much work to do within the community itself, because we are a diverse set of people with varied problems that we need to address within the community, and then there are so many issues that are conflicting us every day. So I think that that's fair to understand that we have a different perspective in the moment. So, Shivangi, would you like to also shed light on this issue?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I guess I agree with all the other panelists and what they said. I also feel that when we are talking about intersectionality and where we are placed right now, for example, in India or in our own cities and neighborhoods, there is still not enough uprising of women, cis women, cis heterosexual women. Um, them like there's not no uprising of even in like the colony and the society that I live in. If there was more outspoken cis het women, it would be a more. I think that there are a lot of rights and issues that are intersectional and that coincide with uh, with all of these different movements. And I think we all have a lot to learn from each other. For example, like I think even the queer community can learn a lot from the disability movement, and the disability movement can learn a lot from the other, the Dalit movement, the Adivasi movements, and all of these different movements have a lot to learn from each other. Uh, but definitely there hasn't been uh, space, the space when we're talking about like women's groups, cis women's groups. There definitely I mean I have felt when I have been in such spaces, maybe probably as my privilege of being a cis woman, I have felt a bit of warmth and being welcomed, and I have felt the same in the queer movement as well. But there is still a lot of ableism, and there is um, uh, people are willing to listen, but it's more difficult to make people act on those issues, because there is still so much that needs to be dealt with, and I think that's why there is so much like more people feel comfortable making and creating their own intersectional spaces. And I think that's been true throughout history as well, where the white women's movement was so exclusionary to black women, and the same with disabled women. There, where when if you look at like the history in the U.S. of disability movements, then we see that there's a lot of black people who also come and sit in the movements for the disabled people. We see a lot of queer groups coming and sitting, but we don't see a lot of white women, in at least in the US. So I think there is a certain amount of privilege that needs to be addressed when it comes to the movements, the women's movements, and every kind of movement. I think there is a privilege in each movement that needs to be addressed.
Thanks for bringing that up, Shivangi. I think it makes a lot of sense when we observe the ableism that permeates across our queer movements as well as within the other feminist movements. I think when we are looking at a closer angle and observing the ableist practices and trying to revisit our pride movements and how historically and even in the present, like you have mentioned, how we address disability rights activism throughout the other struggles and including and creating common space for all of the movements would be a better way to go ahead. I think, yeah, thanks for shedding light on that. Would you like to take up the next question, Taarini?
Yeah, sure. So, all of you coming from various backgrounds and networks have operated within multiple structures at work in the redressal of marginalized trans and queer circles. How have you been able to incorporate these issues of your community you work with within the mainstream ones? Surya, would you like to start?
Yeah. In my work, because I work as a reporter, I think this is enormously important because I am sort of on both sides of the conversation in this thing, as somebody who is interviewed about queer stuff, as somebody who follows the news on queer issues, and then as a reporter myself, it is I think it's very fortunate that I get to sort of be able to represent myself in very mainstream spaces, by basically speaking to people like myself. So whenever I do a story, I definitely, I think about if I can make it intersectional, and the more intersectional I can make it, the better. And of course, being in the queer community, that obviously informs my work a lot, right? Because I know what people complain about when we see ourselves in the news. I know like how, I mean, queer issues are not taken seriously in the news at all, right? It's either like very, very gory, tragic things which are reported, or it's very happy, like rainbow, look at us all looking amazing and fabulous, like it's like those two things. And there is no sustained coverage, there is no follow up, events are sort of reported on their own, there is no pattern or analysis, so it doesn't lead to any real change. Before we were printing PR pieces. When I say we, I mean like news industry. Before we were printing like PR pieces about the police or the government saying that queer people don't deserve rights, and now it's like we're printing pieces where people are like, oh, we are very happy with the government. And so there is that nuance is missing because reporters are not actually interested in queer lives, or rather they don't know about it and they don't want to make the work of informing themselves. So when I do this work, that is obviously very important to me. To whenever I can, whenever my editor allows me to pursue queer stories, I definitely try to make it intersectional, and of course make my other stories also intersectional. Like if I'm doing something about mental health, I naturally know a lot of queer people with mental health, being one of them myself. So it's like that there are a lot of ways to make different stories intersectional. I definitely do that, and part of it is kind of knowing that it is sort of making like a laundry list of intersections, right? Like I'm not going to naturally come up with a perfectly diverse group of people to talk to. I have to see like, okay, does this match, like I sort of have like this checklist in my mind that I operate with, and I'm like, okay, like I can't have these many upper caste people. I need to find somebody like who's not, right, like who's oppressed, and more intersectional in that way. And sometimes that process, I think, when you talk about it, doesn't sound very nice because um, people want, I don't know, like I think in some ways it does make people feel tokenized, but I think it's like if you have 10 people and each of them is like a token for like a different thing, that's still better than having 10 people who are all like the most privileged of that like of that whatever topic you're talking about, right? So yeah, I definitely, and it is something that I do very intentionally. And sometimes I do meet like I often have queer people who also see me as a reporter and they don't know if they can trust me, right? Which is totally fair because they've had negative experiences with reporters and they don't know who I am as a person. So I've had those experiences as well, and I don't I absolutely don't blame them at all. Like if they want if they are even unpleasant to me because they've had unpleasant experiences with other reporters. And I think it's just something that if there were more reporters who were doing this intentionally, that would in the future change. So we just have to keep doing this. Thanks.
Thanks, Surya, for that really informative, for throwing an insight on how queer spaces operate within the media houses and how reporting can change from a queer lens, and also giving us an insight on that perspective. So I think, yeah, this has been quite informative. So, Pooja, would you like to talk about your experiences?
Right. So in terms of how uh, I've tried to make sense of all of this in terms of my location, in terms of my politics, in terms of my professional, and somewhere all of these lines have blurred quite interestingly. Is that I, First of all, to find myself in a discipline that has tried to cure women like me. I'm lesbian, I'm a mental health practitioner, so I have engaged with mental health curriculum. Of course, there are ways in which perhaps the language of the curriculum has changed and may not be as sort of as you know, as trying as hard to cure, but at the same time the mainstream profession of psychology, psychiatry all still do operate from a very diagnostic biomedical kind of a framework. And one of their very important projects through history has been to control women. So, you know, to sort of be allies in this social control of women and queer people and trans people, and to find yourself in that profession and then have questioning it in these multiple locations of as an object to be cured, or as well as a subject that's now critiquing from the inside. It's been an interesting journey. And I think in taking it to mainstream work, what we have done, we do find ourselves in mainstream spaces, right? I think we have again, I think the oppressed or the stigmatized do have an interesting list of, or interesting list of strategies. So you can't really engage with the mainstream in only a particular manner. So you're trying to mix and match and try what works. At some points, some things fail because you are really up against some very, very old and powerful institutions. But you're constantly trying a few things out. And one of those has been trying to do this work of queering mental health, and also then creating the queer voice within mental health from the pathologized person or pathologized entity to be cured in order to conform and return to mainstream, to actually sort of explore the understanding of normal abnormal, to look at to look at mental health challenges as consequences of leading stigmatized and difficult and oppressed lives. So these have been some of the questions we've tried to raise in the mainstream. And I suppose another strategy what you've tried then is to start talking with the ones who are kind of sort of showing an eagerness to listen, and then work your way inwards. You know, so I think that's another thing we've done. And just to finish off this response, to also say that this has meant engaging with the whole process of producing knowledge. Taking the work of gender sexuality mainstream into mental health space has meant reviewing what knowledge means, how knowledge is produced, because now we are saying that in mental health, as it should be in other spaces also, we are going to learn from lived experience. So the way of engaging with knowledge is different, and you're sort of challenging the mainstream understanding of knowledge, which only can come through a certain process of looking at the oppressed a certain way, and then you go there and then you study them and you come back and you write your your knowledge. So in terms of even challenging what we consider knowledge, what are these other ways of producing knowledge? How is validity and invalidity of knowledge understood? Has also been one of the, I think, processes of trying to shake the mainstream up a little bit. Thanks.
Thanks, Pooja, for this really informative discussion on how we have traced mental health aspects through the earlier times. I think from the DSM classifications of initial homosexuality and queer and trans health being a mental health issue, to the current times where we have incorporated into the mental health practices, and wherein I think the subject and objective view of discussing mental health practices. I think it's a very insightful answer that we have learned from you today. I think earlier, the terminologies that you have raised upon, I think we had discussed this in an earlier interview with Dr. Aksa, who has worked closely in the medical profession, and she has herself has also specified that the lack of medical terminology, and sometimes medical terminology in itself, continues to trigger trans community. So I think in this context, the points that you have made are very valid. I think they shed a lot of insight on how we can navigate through mental health and regular public health discourses and engage better with our audiences. I think also we have this question of understanding how people are interacting with the general public health enforcement authorities and how mental health navigates through these spaces. So I think therein also it plays a very crucial role. Shivangi, would you like to shed light on this? Would you like to talk anything more?
Yeah, sure. I'll just be brief, I guess. For me, honestly, I have no idea what like the mainstream even looks like. I don't think I've ever uh, I think I've mostly been shut from such spaces which are mainstream, and even in the art world, or in the as a consultant, I continue to work in the margins, in the intersections of society, and I don't know like what how being in the mainstream would look like, and what my work would look like in the mainstream, because I don't think I've ever experienced that, and I don't know if I'm even interested in that, in working in the for the in the mainstream, um, because I think it's more feasible, it's more productive maybe, and I hate that word, but I think it's better if I'm working within, my work is within the community, within for for the people, by the people. That's something that I think that has really influenced my work, is doing things for disabled people, for queer people, um, and other marginalized groups, and and because yeah, I just don't think as a disabled kid, I was never in schools, I was never allowed or even welcomed in mainstream spaces. Um, and I think it's important definitely to question that, why do we have to modify, why is it like our responsibility to modify the mainstream, and it's true that it's true in like a lot of movements, it's like we say, nothing without us, nothing about us without us, and that is also something I completely believe in. But at the same time, I see that in the mainstream there's a lot of nowadays there's a lot of people who come from many different kinds of privileges, who are cisgender or heterosexual or able-bodied, able-minded. They are the ones who end up getting the opportunities to do the work that we have experienced throughout our lives, because uh, those spaces are so like there is so much gatekeeping in those spaces, in terms of degrees, and what kind of academic degree, what kind of experience, and all these things that you have, and all of these academic spaces and like places where you can get experience are also gate kept. So so it's very difficult for me to imagine what it would look like in the mainstream, because I constantly see only like people who are kind of allies speaking, instead of the people who it's actually relevant to. So yeah, I guess that's what I'll say about that.
Thanks, Shivangi. I think that throws a lot of light on how we can try to make queer spaces and other spaces more able. So basically, I think the ableism that operates, and I think that sort of translates into leading them into not so safe spaces, and thereby, I think we can engage with these spaces in a better way. I think thanks for shedding light on that. Uh, Taarini, would you like to go with the next question?
The society that we live in is not only patriarchal but equally homophobic and transphobic. And the conversations around these themes generally avoid talking about certain areas that attempt to change the position in the society. Would you like to throw some light upon the challenges to deal and function with these deep rooted prejudices in our day to day lives and what attempts are being made in addressing the situation?
Pooja, would you like to answer this?
Sure. I think once you start talking about oppression, any axis of oppression, what it means is that the status quo is in trouble. The status quo is now under threat, and that means there will be pushback uh, from spaces of power, however they converge. So I think one goes into this kind of work expecting that kind of pushback as well. Um, and I think as far as gender, sexuality, and queer women and trans women, and here just to say that in terms of how we are engaging with all of this, I think we have it's about multiple levels of engagement. How are we engaging with this at the level of family, at the level of profession, at the level of community, at the level of even engagement with state, because that's also a very, very big question. So I think each it is definitely, I mean, it is definitely challenging, and there's going to be pushback. So I think it's about just knowing what we need in each of these spaces to question the status quo, to try to sort of to try to sort of shake that balance up, and in addition to that, to say that. I think this is where we then sort of gravitate towards collectivizing, because I don't think that the marginalized also have the luxury of sort of just having these very individual scripts of resistance. I'm not saying that there isn't individual resistance. What I'm saying is that when there is a sense of what we are up against, collectivizing becomes not just a value, collectivizing becomes a strategy, collectivizing becomes a source of strength, and sort of a really something that gives you the foundation to mount these sort of challenges to the status quo. So I think, yeah, so that's how I think the trajectory goes.
Thanks for shedding light on this information. So basically, I think we'll have to look at how our movements are more collective rather than individual, and I think how we navigate through these spaces, through the patriarchal structures, by collectivizing, and thereby, or in our AIQA's constitution, like by unionizing against the patriarchal society frameworks that we have to navigate. Thanks, Pooja, again. Shivangi, would you like to talk about this?
Yeah, sure. So, when I heard this question, I was like thinking of my privilege as upper caste person. I think that is something I think about Hinduism and how oppressive that has been, and how in those spaces and in those within family structures, within all these what the government likes to call private or well, now the private is very much open to the public, right? Even though there is a law against that. But I think when I think about like Hinduism and how that is something like constantly in the government, in the government is taking what is said in those scriptures, and it's not just, it's not just probably Hinduism, but all kinds of religions where people only stick to they're not willing to change those structures that are present in their religions, in their but especially I think Hinduism is what I can speak about, because that's something I've grown up with, and it's only now that I have started questioning the prejudices that are held in within the Hindu religion, and that's something, it's very important, because if we are not able to address these prejudices within our own families and within our own social groups, then how will we address them, out in the when the government is making laws, or even in the courtroom, or spaces like that. And I think that's where I would say, like, again, when the first question was asked, that it's the same when we think about just women's issues, and like how the women's movement started. It's because of all these oppressions that we experience within families. It's because of all these structures that exist in upper caste families, and the patriarchy that exists in families, and the way we grow up around families, and the expectation of, or the kind of the whole idea of reproduction, and all of these things. I think even in schools we see there is nowadays we hear a lot about different kinds of questions that are asked on to students in schools, that like shape their beliefs into even more like rigid structures that are prescribed by Hinduism. So I think that's what I thought about when this question was asked. So yeah, I think that's it.
That's so true. I think we have to revisit the changes. The changes begin from within us, within the individual family frameworks and the individual society frameworks that we operate from. And therein, we can deconstruct the patriarchal oppression that has permeated across the society. I think these are very valid points. Thanks for sharing them. Um, so, uh, Surya, would you like to go next on this?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's extremely difficult operating as a queer person in the structures that have been set up. Like personally, I don't, personally, I think because for myself, I have sort of curated the sort of life where I can just be myself. I'm very keen about surrounding myself with people like me, and it's not just about being queer. It's also about the being neurodivergent. I am a neurodivergent person. I have been diagnosed with ADHD. Um, and I think it's also very important to value, like, people who also do not get like a professional diagnosis. I think that's also very important. But generally functioning as a neurodivergent queer person, like personally it's fine. I can create and choose which spaces I want to be in and not, what kind of people I want to interact with personally and things like that. But professionally, it is extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult because it's like, first of all, being read as female, already you are not taken seriously, right? And then on top of that, being read as queer, you're not taken seriously even more. And then as a neurodivergent person, when you do not sort of act in the same way that neurotypical people expect, then even more that is sort of like not taken seriously. So I think like being a person who wants to operate in like the capitalistic society that we have, we're supposed to sort of like make a profitable production or something or the other, like being a queer neurodivergent person operating within that, where you also do want to work, you want to do things that you're passionate about, but yeah, it's a lot of navigating. Like for example, before kind of going on any sort of assignment, you have to think so much just about how I look, so that people take me seriously, hopefully right off the bat, and I don't have to, like I get into these weird conversations sometimes with interviewees, where they ask about like my whole work history and everything, because I don't know, they think I'm underage, or they just think I'm like underqualified, or they look at me and they say that you don't look like you report about serious things like these, which is extremely difficult when you're just trying to get your work done and go home on time, and just like live your life. So yeah, it's something that I have to take into consideration like every single day, about how I'm being perceived, how I should act. There is the masking as a like to seem more neurotypical, and then there is also gender performance to seem more cis. And these are things that I sort of constantly have to do, sometimes very intentionally, sometimes just unintentionally. um, and in terms of like changing that, I don't know, like I look around and I literally don't see a single person like me. um, so for me it's just about kind of trying to be more comfortable, um, being myself and being however I am, and still, getting ahead in terms of work and stuff. And hopefully, other people will see that, and it will gradually become more acceptable. And, and even if I don't see people like myself, I see people, maybe they're not a reporter, maybe they're something else, or maybe they're a reporter, but they're in another country. But there are ways, to find people that I sort of have things in common with. Some of my biggest inspirations are my friends, literally, like luckily enough, who are doing like amazing things, who are also neurodivergent, so they do multiple things and they do them very well. Who are also queer and are out about, being queer and doing activism, and also like doing very different other things. And and so those people sort of give me that courage to kind of just express myself and not change myself too much. And and hopefully like the cycle will continue like that, like maybe hopefully I will do that for somebody else, and so hopefully like people like us gradually will see more of us and it'll be more accepted. But I think the another strange thing that's happening right now is that queer and trans people are sort of getting like mainstream acceptance and approval, because I think that right now there is pinkwashing and homo nationalism that is happening in this country. And and there are certain rights that are being acknowledged for queer people in return for um, support for the current existing government. And so I think that that's a very weird position to be. Like, yes, I want to be accepted, but not like that, like at all. So yeah, I think it's like things are getting worse but also better. And and it's a very I think it's a very confusing position to be like a queer person in this country right now. And I think we can only just acknowledge our privileges. Like, I know I have so much caste privilege, which protects me so much from like queer phobia, or even like other kinds of phobia or whatever, which I would experience perhaps more of if I do not have the caste privilege and class privilege that I do. So so I take it upon myself to sort of try and knock down other Brahmin people when they are being you know oppressive. I was going to use a cuss word, but I don't know if that's allowed. So let's just say oppressive. So I think that is my duty to like improve that person, so that hopefully they are more of a safe space for other non-Brahmin people. So yeah, so I mean I think it is a confusing position, but like we just have to do how much we can. and whatever we cannot do, and where we really are marginalized and disenfranchised. Hopefully, I mean, for some of us, we have certain resources that will help us through, and some of us don't. So, yeah, that's all I have to say. Thanks.
You were on mute, Raju. You're still on mute, Baba. I believe that there seems to be a technical glitch from his end. Just give us a minute, please. Yeah, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
Hi.
We need to read into the history of intersectionality and all had and how it's not always something to celebrate also, because it's more to me, it's something to advocate for. It's something that we really need to credit black women for the work that they have put in uh, towards intersectional issues and intersectionality, and even the word intersectionality that we are using is something that we really need to credit black women for, and really look at the history of how it was created and how it started being used. And it wasn't always something that was trying to describe the difficulties that black women faced in uh, in black black spaces, in cis black spaces, and also in white women spaces. So it was a lot of the problems that they were facing, not like something that they were trying to celebrate. It was this kind of the fact that they weren't able to fit into any of these spaces, and they had to, even though they tried, there was a lot of black women who tried to be part of the movement, the women's movement, even the black movement, the civil rights movement, but those they weren't heard and the issues weren't addressed, and that was the reason intersectionality, I think, came to be, and that is something that I also experienced when, as an upper caste person who's disabled and queer, I see that, like, in the Hindu society, disabled people are called Divyang, and that means that is something that even the government of India has adopted such orthodox, right-wing politics that we have going on right now. The Yang literally means the divine body, which is very hurtful kind of sentiment to put out people with disabilities, because it makes it kind of a issue which is that we have inherited our disabilities, that it's our karma, that it's our fault, and it's something that we have to struggle with, that we have to face in our lives. But also the divine body, it means that it kind of means that there is some kind of superfit formula. Superfit is a theory in which there is a lot of kind of super power that is given to disabled people, just for being disabled. So, for example, when the able society sees us as an inspiration, or when they see that when they say that despite being a person with disability, they are accomplishing this. That is what happens when we use words like design. And if that is the kind of attitude that creates barriers for disabled people, for our bodies and our minds. So, and so, yeah, I think it's really important to look at the history when we're talking about
how often certain people are raised. And I think even in when we think about freedom of marriage right now, there's a lot of people questioning why we think that. Hello, okay, people, can you hear me?
Um, Hi Shivangi, I think there's some problem with your mic. We are unable to hear you clearly.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah, I guess I'll put my video off.
Okay,
Um,
thanks.
Wait, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're audible now.
Okay, great. Um, so yeah, I think for me, like when I even when I've been in the I've when I've worked and been a lot with people who are disabled and people who are working towards the disability movement in India, I've experienced a lot of queer phobia, and I've experienced this perception that disabled women are supposed to get married, and that somehow uplifts their status as a disabled person. And even the clothing, they question a lot of the clothing, and so this exists in the within the disability movement in India. And I think that is something that I'm constantly trying to address through my work, and through being in certain spaces, even um, uh, yeah, even in such panel discussions and all. But yeah, I think that's all I'll say about that. Thank you.
Thanks Shivangi for talking at length about the intersectionality and how it impacts our identities and thereby also impacts the ableist movement. So, um, Surya, would you like to talk about this?
Yes, sorry, I just lost track of the question. Could somebody just repeat it for me, or I'll just give me a second to just look
Yeah,
it up.
I'll just do that. So, this space is the culmination of diverse experiences and journeys, but we're still limited in making this space as intersectional as we would love it to be, owning to time and resources. Would you like to share your experience while working with people on intersections and while interacting with them?
Right. I mean, I think for me, I'm in my work, I meet a lot of people who have less privilege than me, right? Like that's most of the. I mean, I would not want to talk to people who are as privileged as me and like represent them more. Um, it's usually like a lot of working class people, and yeah, I mean, it's just you just go there with empathy, and you just go to your work just with empathy and just being like, okay, this person, like there was a time when I did a story about housing problems in Kolkata for Muslim people, and I spoke to this woman who had been, oh my god, like she had so much trauma just from the fact of being a Muslim person looking for housing. And it was very, I think the conversation, if it was emotionally exhausting for me, imagine how much of an impact it must have had for her, right? Like there was so much trauma there, and in that conversation there was a lot of um, like she was basically like a lot of blame was projected onto me, you know, which I totally understand, and she constantly kept questioning my privilege and holding me to account, throughout that conversation as somebody who is not just Hindu, like the most, privileged of the Hindus in Bengal as possible, as somebody who has who has a house in the city and does not have to struggle, because her whole problem was that she lived in a village and she had to commute for hours and hours just to go to college. That kind of was, when she couldn't find housing, and when she could find housing, she had to pretend to be Hindu, and there would be people who would say extremely Islamophobic things to her. Like it was just this whole awful story, but she constantly kept holding me to account as somebody who's doing the story but does not face those problems, right? And and as in like, will this story really change? And there's so many people I meet like who are sort of just exhausted about talking about the problems. Like even if you just think about the trans community, like somebody said this very interesting thing, that we, like the trans community, we are over researched, but at the same time, like we're not, and it's like we're very over researched and under researched because it's coming from a very cis lens, all the research, so none of it actually helps us. Okay, but at the same time, everybody wants to sort of like gawk at trans people and like know about like our lives and things like that, and it's very much sort of like I don't know, like tragedy porn or something like that. um, so and so many of these people, like they get so fed up of these, of like reporters coming to speak to them again and again about their problems, none of which changes. These people sort of like give their time, and then sometimes they see that in the final result they have been represented very badly. Sometimes, like, I mean, there was literally recently a piece where somebody wrote she prefers he they pronouns. Okay, like think about that for a second. Okay. So like people obviously like get very tired and very sort of like done with the whole thing of even people coming to them to say that, oh, we are going to represent you, right, in the story, because it doesn't actually, it's not the kind of representation that helps or anything. So I think like I always go into these situations being fully aware that in this dynamic, whatever my personal intersections may be or whatever it is, in the dynamic of a reporter and an interviewee, I hold more power, right? Like I literally can decide how this person is seen by the world, and to be very kind of aware of that, and to kind of try and minimize that power dynamic as much as possible, and give this other person as much of an agency as possible, and not look at it as I'm going to save them, right? Because I mean that's a very, I think, that very stupid aspiration. You can just do what you can, and it's just you just have to be aware, and just have to be empathetic, and you just have to just as aware and empathetic as you can be, like knowing that the power that you do hold and the powers that you don't hold, and how everybody's intersections operate. There have also been cases where people have asked me for money to if I want to interview them, which is not allowed. But again, these people, they're giving interviews to like so many people. Again, they're being represented very badly. They're like, I'm giving all my time for this. What am I getting in return? Like nothing. Like a horrible story, right? Which is like not even done properly. So it's like you just have to come at it with that sort of understanding and humility, and try to keep yourself as updated and knowledgeable and aware as you possibly can. Thanks.
Thanks, Surya. As a genderqueer person working in medical reporting, I can relate to certain aspects of what you've just covered. I think when we are talking about coverage and reporting of trans people in the news, I think um, we recently also updated AIQA guidelines, and I think because the amount of misreporting, the amount of misgendering, the amount of pronouns which are not being used correctly, and like you just clearly pointed out in a case where they have misgendered a person. And I think sometimes it becomes extremely traumatic for the subject who is being interviewed or the subject who is being presented at that point of time. And thanks for rightfully pointing out that media owns the power, and the power lies in their hand when they're presenting a story, and therefore they have to be cognizant of this and present the findings accordingly. I think these are really valid points that we need to consider when we are looking at mainstream as well as subsequent reporting of uh, news covering trans and queer people. Because I think it's not just about being aware, it's more about being empathetic. Like a panelist, like we have just spoken about, I think being kind and being empathetic would automatically lead us to reporting things in a fairer manner, I believe. Yeah. Um, Pooja, would you like to talk about this?
Thanks. So, again, an important question. And in response to this, I'd like to make it a two-part answer. One is to, when we speak of intersectionality, I mean, what are we saying? For example, when I say lesbian, am I also aware and sort of in conceptualizing or in speaking, am I also thinking of the Muslim lesbian who is impacted by Islamophobia as well as homophobia? Am I thinking of the Dalit lesbian who is impacted by casteism, caste oppression, as well as homophobia? So this is in terms of intersectionality. How are these how within these identity groups, or identity is also a bit of a sort of a sketchy word these days to use, but just to say that within these groups, how do we understand, sort of understand multiple axes that impact one person? That's number one. And the second part is that of interconnectedness. And in interconnectedness, I am talking not just of individuals, but then of movements. Because in movements, the mobilizing or the convergence may happen on a single point. Say we speak of the disability rights movement, or we speak of the queer rights movement, we speak of the trans rights movement, we're speaking of Dalit rights movements. So the movements and the mobilization may happen on one axis of oppression. That means that people, that those who are part of this movement are also constantly in a process of creating knowledge about that particular axis of oppression. And then we come to the part which in which I agree with Shivangi wholeheartedly, is that part to learn then. So how does interconnectedness between groups, in what ways can we facilitate that and learn from each other because of this very, very lived experience based sort of valuable knowledge and perspective that's generated at each of these points of convergence? Because we know then when we go back to the intersectionality part, in each of these groups there are persons impacted by multiple marginalizations. So I think to just sort of keep your view on all of these aspects is one way to engage with intersectionality and multiple axes of oppression.
Thanks, Pooja, for not just talking about intersectionality, but also clearing the air about interdependencies of movement. This is a very unique perspective because we generally don't look at interdependencies of several movements and how they culminate towards a person's identity, and how they control the freedom of expression and how a person's ability to navigate through these spaces operate again. So, Tarini, would you like to go with the next question?
Yeah. This is heterosexual, upper caste, upper class, misogynistic understanding of a body when it comes to women comes with the sole purpose of procreation, birth a boy, who becomes the prodigy. It's a horrible system where the cis heterosexual women fall in trap of the patriarchal gaze. All of us at some point are asked to behave within the boundaries of binary gender constructs. What has your experience been like when you were able to talk about? Maya, would you like to start?
I think Maya is not in the call. She had to attend an emergency. Um, Perhaps.
Uh, Surya, would you like to start then?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is a very loaded question for me. Um, because I mean, it happens a lot, and I don't know like how to really coherently answer it, because like there is this like people just, it's almost like, I don't know, like so many times, like I feel, like I'm in the wrong body, but not just in a queer way. I mean, like not just in like a, I don't know, like a dysphoria way. I mean, it's just the expectations that people have because of the way I look, and these expectations are like horribly mismatched with like what I am or what I feel, and it creates this dissonance. Like like in I think in college, I had like sort of told like I was hanging out like with an ex, so friend, whatever, and it said that like I have no desire to give birth to children. I'm never going to give birth to children, and he is a biology person. I mean now like he's doing PhD and stuff, right? Like proper biology person, and he was like, like it's like your biological clock, like it's gonna happen, like you're going to have this desire, and I'm still like that clock. I don't know, is broken or something, okay, because it still hasn't um worked or anything, but yeah, there's this constant, like I think it's just I sometimes feel like imprisoned by like people's gazes, like on my body, and kind of like the expectations that arise out of it, like somebody else having a different body could do something, and me having this body I can do something, and it's going to be interpreted like completely differently. So yeah, I mean I think it's a very it's it's a very I think difficult thing, and I don't really know like how, because I think especially when you're seen as female, maybe you are sort of like there are these like there are these massive expectations, or like these very rigid expectations that come with that. Like of course you must be a certain way, you must feel a certain way, you must want certain things, and it's kind of not believed, and you sort of like gaslighted if you try to um, explain that that is not how you feel at all, and that is not your reality at all. You're often gaslighted, and people sort of tell you that you're sort of not aware of yourself, or like these things will happen in the future, or it's kind of pathologized that there is something, it's because of certain conditions you have, or certain things that are wrong with you that need to be treated. That is why your personality is sort of in conflict with your body. I think it's seen like that. Like, I mean, so much of it. Like, obviously, I mean, there is a lot of, I do have like actual this like physical dysphoria, but I feel like a lot of it, so much of it is just social. And so much of it is just knowing that okay, if I just perform according to people's expectations, the thing that I'm supposed to do, I'm going to get it done much faster and much more efficiently. And I'll sort of have to uh, kind of overcome lesser obstacles if I sort of just perform, cis womanhood like this person wants me to right now. Um, and those are sort of negotiations that I've had to make, which are obviously extremely unpleasant, which is why I very intentionally create spaces where I don't have to do that, and people don't have those expectations. It's also very hard, like when you sort of have certain old friendships and you realize that these like people sometimes can be so close to you, but they still have this mentality somewhere that biologically we are predestined to be or do certain things, and yeah, and it's very hard to get people to really come out of that mindset unless they already are queer, and their world already is different because of their own experiences or people they know very closely. It's extremely hard to really get this biology question, or to really understand what biology actually means, and all the things that people sort of put on biology but actually has nothing to do with biology. I think there also perhaps needs to be education on that basis, but so much of oppression, so many systems and structures are created on the basis of like false science and prejudice science and prejudiced readings of biology. So I don't think that is something that people in power are very eager to address. I don't think anybody wants to change this. I don't think they're invested, because so much power structure is maintained on the basis of biology and what are seen as biological differences. Yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Surya. I think we have, yeah, I think this exploration of the flawed understanding of biology and thereby gaslighting audiences on this perspective. And I think this is a fairly common narrative that we see, and a very problematic narrative to begin with. So I hope over the times we can look at methods to address this issue and understand and how we can improve um, understanding of this, or rather an exploration of a pseudo instead of a pseudo scientific perspective, rather a more scientifically driven conversation um, on these aspects. Pooja, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so I think at this point, if I'd just like to reflect a little bit on what my journey has been, and how gender conformity became something that was sort of delaying my queer awakening. Is that the connection that we very easily draw between the body binary, and then the gender binary fits if it fits in a certain way on the body binary, and then of course then there's only one sexuality, and then there's also the matter of gender expression, gender conformity. And as a gender conforming cis woman, I too have internalized the script of being very ticking all the boxes for the cis-het male gaze, for the cis-het male consumption. And so when I look like this, I'm thinking, I'm not thinking actually. And I mean, my default is that I must be, must obviously be attracted to the cis-het man. And I must, I'm sure I am heterosexual. I mean, there is no room for doubt, because gender expression is very is meant for that what we call the sort of male consumption market. And then to at that point just sort of stop that in its tracks, and look at how then the body gender binary, and then heterosexuality, and where between that there is definitely a disconnect, is the point, has been sort of my struggle, I think, my journey, to wonder that if I am attracted to masculine women, and I'm myself a feminine woman, does it mean that I am just a special kind of heterosexual, and maybe not a special kind of heterosexual, but actually lesbian? So I think these have been some of some of my struggles, and some of the ways in which I have had to unlearn scripts of body binary, gender binary, heterosexuality, gender conformity, gender expression, and all of and I suppose now these are the understandings that I also bring to my work. Thank you.
Thanks, Pooja, for shedding light on your personal journeys of exploring and navigating sexuality, gender binaries, and gender conformity in relation to patriarchy and the existing oppressional structures. Um, so,
Yeah. Shall I go ahead with the last question?
no, I think 1 second.
Yeah.
Yeah, Shivangi, would you also like to talk about this?
Sure. I think coming from my positionality as someone who's grown up as a disabled person, I'll talk about my experience with the expectations of society, and from my body, and the biological expectations that are that are there in general in the society. And I think this is one of the biggest reason that, like, a lot of us, I think, in this panel, and a lot of us outside, are kind of pushed into the work of activism, and pushed into having to advocate for ourselves because of the biological expectations and the biological things that are heavy upon us. So I mean, we there's a lot like in the history about the when we think about the eugenics movement and which talked about the survival of the fittest, um, and because of that reason, within disability, people look at disability as something that needs to be fixed, something that needs to be biologically fixed within people who are disabled, and so like for me also, like as a kid when I was born disabled, there was a lot of medical trauma. There's a lot of you know, biologically that that was tried on me to something that needs to be fixed, that so that I can look like biologically look or be similar to the uh, the normal, quote unquote, normal bodies. And it's it also, this also leads to the question of like marketable babies, like what kind of child is marketable, and that is where even gender comes into question, where that is when the gender is assigned to us, that is when disability is assigned to us, when we are diagnosed, when we are all of these things are happening at the same time as soon as we are born, and it describes how marketable we are, and how when I say marketable, it means how much economic labor we can do, or how much we can serve in the heteropatriarchal society, how much we can reproduce. And so when we also like think about reproductive rights, because this is the question about reproduction. So when we think about reproductive rights, even now we have the MTP bill, which is the medical termination of pregnancy bill, which is going on. I think it's an act now. And where are the sexual and reproductive, rights for people who are disabled, and who are queer, who are trans, and who don't have access to a lot of health care? We really need to question those things. Uh, to whom is abortion allowed? To whom is abortion and access, and what kind of fetus, what kind of fetus the parent, decide, the person who's reproducing is deciding to have. And these are all questions that, when you're putting them into a law, then it becomes kind of a moral statement. And I always, say that if you can't deal with handling a disabled or queer child, then you should not really have a child at all. Because there's no telling, there's no, when that child grows up, there's no telling that they can acquire a disability. They can there's so many things that come into play when you're having a child. So really, like, it's great if you are if people are deciding to terminate child, a fetus which has disability, or which has and I would have really loved to hear Maya on this, because I think a lot of intersex issues are also coincides with these disability issues, because of all the sexual health and reproductive healthcare services that we don't have access to, because of all the ableism that we have to experience as children. And it has been traumatizing for me. I think when I approached, in the past, when I've tried to access sexual and reproductive healthcare, a gynecologist, I remember one time, kind of, I entered the room, and they saw me, and I think I was below 25 years of age at that time. And I entered the room, and he was a cis man, and he was immediately like, "Oh, are you married? Why are you not married?" And that was that is again like something which I experience constantly. If the health practitioner is disabled friendly, then they are not queer friendly, and if they are queer friendly, then they are not disabled friendly. So I think those are the things that that come to my mind, and I think we really should go back and try to understand where these medical models, because biological and medical is so intertwined together. Where are these ideas coming from? Because where are we? And it's the eugenics, the white biologists, the even if we look at our textbooks in our schools, that is something that we need to go back to and question.
Thanks for shedding light on these really important questions. I think when we are looking at marketability of children, or rather the consumption from a capitalistic gaze, which constantly determines and predetermines how a child is supposed to grow like, or how a child is supposed to be envisioned, and thereby also predate and predetermine our conversations that are done, that are handled with children and with queer as well as disabled folks. I think these are very important conversations that we need to look back, and as you have clearly pointed out, we need to look at it from a eugenics or euphonics line. Tarini, would you like to go with the last question to the panel?
Yeah. So, would you like to reflect from your experience and learnings while working with the community? What have been the key messages that you would like to give to the trans and the queer women working and living in intersectional spaces to facilitate their growth and progress? Shivangi, would you like to start? Was I audible? I hope.
Shivangi, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know. Sorry, I didn't know I was supposed to go. So, yeah, I don't know. Progress is a word I don't really like, but this is something. I think I have learned a lot from the disability, the Black disabled, the Dalit disabled folks that I have encountered in my life, and that is how I have come to learn all the CRIP rights, the disability studies, the CRIP, the spaces which have existed in our lives, and trying to consume the media which for example the film Crip Camp is where when I saw that film, and that's on Netflix, it's something that really I think gives out a beautiful message about intersectionality, about how we can all work together in ways that can be that can help us all flourish in different ways, and that we all have uh, you know experiences that are valuable, and that we all have um, uh, you know bodies which can get along with others, having thinking about pleasure, thinking about body autonomy, thinking about uh, all of these different things. It's so important to have collective access, collective liberation, and I think everybody is capable of those things. We all, it's I have learned from my Crip ancestors, my queer elders. All of these people have taught me that we are doing this work from our own bedrooms, and we are doing this from our own in our own ways, even if we are doing it alone, even if we don't have any friends. And that's something I can really say, that as a disabled child, I hardly have had any friends. Even now, I struggle with friendships, but I still feel like there is a connection that I feel to people who are queer and trans and disabled and crip, and really I think it starts with a lot of times it starts with those words, because I think now in India we're seeing now that a lot of disabled people are acknowledging the word disabled, is when there is sort of an uprising and a collectivizing, because and that's also true for the queer movement, where when people started acknowledging the word queer and trans and the words that were used against them, that they're acknowledging them and using them as a way to uh, collectivize and ask for their rights. And even if with the working women's movement, we can think about the slut walks and all of these different things that the words that I think that help us collectivize, is something that is something that we really need to hold on to. And yeah, I think that's what I'll say to people. If if someone was ever to see me as a queer elder or a crip crip elder, and really I think what I said before about not having access to academic spaces and work spaces, I have only learned through the experiences of my crip and queer elders, through the anthologies that I have read. There is this book called Disability Visibility by Alice Wong that I think everybody should read. There is a lot of there's one of the first book that I read that helped me understand my queerness was The Color Purple. So I think those are the ways that we are working towards a better kind of future for all of us.
Thanks, Shivangi, for sharing your experiences of working within the community and working on individual identities, and how we can use collectivizing and also reading in order to fight, and also in order to grow through our daily struggles and our daily challenges that we face. The Color Purple is also a very close book to me. I remember reading it a few years ago when I was in the peak of my depression, and it helped me out. Um, Thanks for that memory. Pooja, would you like to go next?
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. So uh, I think what I'd like to say in response is, first of all, to say that if at all I have messages to give, it comes from the submission is that this is something that worked for me. I have also seen it work for some people around me, and therefore hoping that it works for some other people too. So not in a so I don't want to sort of say this in any kind of prescriptive fashion. Is the support of the community, and because of living in such a cis hetero patriarchal sort of world, that normativity is so overpowering, so it's everywhere, and that has meant that community spaces were what made my own was what made my own struggles be seen, be heard, be taken as real, and feel supported, feel care. And I suppose when normative systems sort of withhold that kind of care and support because of your identity, that you do it's been community spaces that have held this held me through some of my struggles. Here, I don't mean to say that, any of this, even finding community or being in community or being around people who are from the community, none of this is easy. It's not as if you are meeting people you are going to always maybe agree with, or people you will always like even. But if that experience of oppression from the rest of the world, and if that connects you, I think that space becomes very, very valuable, in order for you to, in some way, just go back to your own life and fight your own battles. So I think collectives, I what I hope for, so not really a message in that sense, is what I hope is that every queer and trans person is able to find that community in whatever space, virtual, real. I mean, today again, virtual spaces is what we might rely on, just to be able to find community in whatever, on whatever terms that they want, and to just sort of have access to that. Because I mean, there's no, as far as we can see right now, there's no end date to marginalization. Our struggles will continue, and I hope that none of us are alone in our struggle. So I think that's what I would like to say. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for these insightful and I think very important and pertinent points. We have to rely on communities towards the end of the day. I wholeheartedly agree with that, and these would probably pave a way for self care, to also engage better with our peers. Um, Thanks for sharing this information. Um, Surya, would you like to comment on the question?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there's no easy way to sort of, uh, tell people how to overcome their struggles, because I think we're only, and unfortunately, as like whatever power we have, I think our because of our privileges and the locations in which we are oppressed, the ways in which we are oppressed, there is very little in our control to be able to overcome that. So, but I think if somebody is watching this, they have internet access at least, and the internet has in many ways saved me, right? Because community, I think the internet has really empowered me and given me agency just to find all these people who sort of think like me, who have sort of like the same struggles that I do, the same experiences that I do, um, who are also sort of just trying to do the best with their experiences and make something out of it, creatively or otherwise. um, so yeah, like for example, I can just only talk about like my own self, and it was the fact that I am neurodivergent is um, me basically solving like an entire life of mysteries. Like my whole life, it's like my whole life was a thriller, and like I have finally solved it. And this has just been possible because of the internet. Because I was unemployed in the last year, I had a lot of time to myself to read up on things. That mattered to me, and that is how I discovered that I'm neurodivergent and I have ADHD. And to get a diagnosis, I had to see three people. I, first spoke to my therapist, who sort of disappeared in the middle of our assessment. Then I went to like a psychiatrist who dismissed me very, very badly and kind of completely put me off of psychiatrist. Sorry. Then I went to another therapist, who finally like assessed me, and I got my diagnosis. But then again, like that therapist was really well suited to me, and now I'm on my third therapist that I've started seeing. Yet I'm as hopeful about therapy as I was, like the first day, some 2 years ago, right? So and it's really the internet which has sort of made me realize like what is bisexuality. What is like when I was a teenager and I was first understanding my queerness, I was like, oh, I can't be gay because I'm straight, like so like just being bisexual, being a feminist, like being realizing that I'm gender fluid, realizing that I'm neurodivergent, there's so many, like, my whole life and my all of my experiences, it's like, this big puzzle that I'm sort of putting together, and it has been the internet really for me. And and there's so much, like, when mental health professionals fail, or like when research fails, right? Because we are sort of under researched, whether it's neurodivergent people or queer people, or we are wrongly researched. And so when those things fail, the community, like, I've written an article today about, like, how neurodivergence and gender fluidity interact with each other. And today, like, and I wrote about something, like, I'm part of this ADHD group, and somebody writes about the problem about that they forget to take medicines. Okay, which, if you have ADHD, like, hello, yeah, that's gonna happen. And and these things, like, we generally treat it as trivial, or we tell people that, like, oh, you just have to work harder at it, and it's just like, it just feels like a personal failing, or like a problem with no solution. But somebody posted about this on an ADHD group, and there are 53 comments last I checked. So I want you to think about, like, 53 ADHD people with ADHD sort of came to this post about how this person can better remember to take their pills, and they all offered solutions or strategies. So that, I think, is the power of validation from community. It literally makes you feel like, yes, I do exist, I am real. And all my experiences, like, whatever I think in my head, yeah, it's real. And yeah, it's because I think everything else is designed to gaslight you, as whether you're when you're marginalized in different ways. The whole world is designed to gaslight you. So I think finding community in order to find that validation is, the most crucial thing, and the easiest thing, if you have access to the internet, that you can do. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. These are really valid points, and I think all of us do rely on the internet. And I think thanks for bringing out the fact that in the space of neurodivergent research, and also to actually work along with communities, how peer-to-peer interactions and how internet serves as a platform to engage with queer audiences better, and how we can leverage that towards um, our growth. These are very pertinent points. Thanks for all the panelists for this really engaging and insightful discussion. Um, Taarini, would you also like to add any concluding remarks?
I think this was a really insightful session for me as well. I've been too lost with my work that I've actually had not had the chance to properly think and ponder upon issues like issues that we are currently facing, even though we face them on a daily basis. But the fact is that we have gotten so used to facing them that we cannot blatantly put it out, okay, that this is what I am going through. And I think I think developing something that we've been reading about Marx is that all of us start feeling alien from whatever we are doing. And there is a sense of alienation from our own selves as well. I think this was like a this was very crucial for me because it became a point where I realized that it's time that I need to slow down on my work and actually read things that matter right now, other than what is going on. And thank you so much for joining in. I really appreciated it. And a few of my friends joined as well. And they were really glad for this session that we held. So thank you so much for joining us today. And Shivangi, I am so sorry I cut your point in the middle. I just got lost in the track. I lost track of the speakers. I am so sorry about that. So yeah,
No,
that's
no worries, no worries. No worries.
so thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank
Thanks a
you for
lot,
having
everyone.
us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks again, and I think
Thanks,
we're very
everyone.
grateful to Abhiti also, who could not join us due to some emergencies, but she has been very instrumental in the drafting and in the execution of the panel. So we are grateful to Abhiti's support and all of the graphics team in behind AIQA who has supported us. We would like to thank them as well, and thanks again for all the panelists for agreeing and sharing their time, their valuable resource of time on this day, and creating it into a more fruitful discussion. we'll be uploading this link soon. So we'll do some video processing and then share the uploads in a while. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye, everyone.
Have a great evening. Do you need any help?
No, I think I'll stop the recording now.
Okay.